We continue now at the top of Daf Lamed Aleph Amud Aleph and Mesechet Sanhedrin. This is Sanhedrin Daf 31a. On the previous Amud, there was a contradiction whether secondary details, does that disqualify the testimony when it comes to capital cases? And the Gemara now answers, Gavra Agavra Karamis, are you having a contradiction between Amoraim? It could be that the Amoraim argue. And Rashi explains, Gavra, Gavra, de Rav Chisda, de Rav Yehuda. You have a contradiction here between Rav Chisda and Rav Yehuda. Again, it could be that Rav Chisda holds it does not disqualify the testimony, and Rav Yehuda holds that it does disqualify the testimony. And the Gemara continues, Nahardoi, Amri, and Nahardoi, they say, Afilu echad omer mana shachar, v'echad omer mana lavan. Even if one of them says that the coin was black, and one of them says that the coin was white, those are details that are not really secondary. But even if there's a contradiction within those kind of details, mitzdarfim, they still join together. And the Gemara says, Keman, who does that follow? Rabbi Yoshua ben Karcha. Are you saying that follows Rabbi Yoshua ben Karcha? Rashi explains, Rabbi Yoshua ben Karcha de mikol makom, because nevertheless, shneim meidim shechayev lamana. They're both saying that the person is obligated to pay a mana. Again, Rabbi Yoshua ben Karcha said, even if they did not see what they're testifying about at the same time. One saw alone on Sunday, the other one saw alone on Monday. Still, Rabbi Yoshua ben Karcha says the testimony is still combined because they're both saying the person owes one mana. It doesn't matter that one saw it on Sunday and the other saw it on Monday. And so the same idea over here. They're both testifying that he owes a mana, whether it was a black coin or whether it was a white coin. It doesn't really matter. But the Gemara says, Amor de Shamat le Rabbi Yoshua ben Karcha, hechadelo mechashu hadadi. Even Rabbi Yoshua ben Karcha, he only said you can combine the testimony when there's no contradiction. And Rashi explains, hechadelo mechashu hadadi, kagon zem meyed al mana shebiyom sheni. For example, this one testifies about the mana on Monday, v'zem meyed al mana shebiyom rishon, the other one and the one on Sunday. Ushnein modin shezelo ra b'shel zeh, and they both admit that each one didn't see the other one. Avol hechad shneim meidim al mana echad u'machishin zeh zeh miyamer. But let's say they're both testifying about the exact same mana, but there's a contradiction within what they are saying. He doesn't necessarily go that far. In other words, one can say that Rabbi Yoshua ben Karcha, in a situation where they're clearly not contradicting each other, they're testifying about a different mana altogether. So there you can combine and say at the end of the day, he owes one mana. That's what it means, heichad lo mekachshu hadadi. But again, heichad mekachshu hadadi, in a situation where they're contradicting one another, they're testifying about the same loan, but contradicting each other in terms of what color, let's say, the coins are. Miyamra, would he say that? Would he go so far? So you can't say that they're following, that Nahardoi is following Rabbi Yoshua ben Karcha. And so the Gemara continues, Alahuda Amar ki haytana de Tanya. Rather, Nahardoi is following the Tana in the following brisa. Amar Rav Shimon ben Elazar. Rav Shimon ben Elazar says, Lo nechleku be'shami u be'shilel al shtei kitei edem sha'achas omeres masayim v'achas omeres moneh. In a situation of, let's say you have two sets of witnesses. One says that the person owes 200. The other one says that the person owes 100. There, Rav Shimon ben Elazar says, Be'shamai and Be'shilel would not argue. Sheyesh b'chlal masayim moneh, because within 200 is 100. They all agree about the 100. Al man nechleku, when would Be'shamai and Be'shilel argue? Al kas achas, let's say you have one set of witnesses. You have two witnesses come in, that's one set. Shebe'shamai omrim nechleku edusan. Be'shamai would say if one of the two witnesses says 100, the other one says 200, there you have to split the testimony. You cannot combine them. Ube'shilel omrim, but Be'shilel say, Yesh b'chlal masayim money, that within 200 is 100, and you can combine this testimony. And Rashi explains, Hu damar ki haytana means Nahardoi amru ki haytana. Nahardoi, they follow this Tana, meaning Rav Shimon ben Elazar. The amar zeh omer mana v'zeh omer masayim. Let's say you have a case. He says, let's say you have a situation, one says a mana, one says masayim, one says 100 dinar, the other says 200 dinar. The machishin is zeh. In that case, they are contradicting one another, but still mitzdarf in the money. You can still combine the testimony for a mana, sheyesh b'chlal masayim mana, because included within 200 is 100. V'lo amrin and shtei and shikru. We don't say that they both lied. We just follow the lesser of them. Nechleka edusan. Again, Beis Shammai say that if it's within one set, then nechleka edusan, the testimony is split. Shekevan she'echad shakran shoven kaneda. Since one is lying, therefore you don't have testimony. But again, Beis Hillel say even in this situation, yesh b'chlal masayim mana, within 200 is 100, meaning shneim me'iden al mana. They're both testifying about a mana. Uva oso mana, and within that mana, ein machishin zeh. There is no contradiction, and that would be the same situation, or that would be the same case in a situation where you have one saying mana shachar and one saying mana lavan. At the end of the day, they're both testifying the person owes a mana, and therefore, again, following Reb Shimon ben Elazar's version of Beis Hillel, that's what Nahardai is saying, that we combine the testimony. And the Gemara continues, Echad Omer Chavis Shal Yayin. Let's say one witness says that it was a barrel of wine that is owed. V'Echad Omer Chavis Shal Shemen, and the other witness says that it's a barrel of oil. Havi Uvda, there actually was a case like this. V'Yasi L'Kami de Rabbi Yami, and the case came before Rabbi Yami. Chayve Rabbi Yami L'Shalum Elei Chavisa de Chamra Migo Chavisa de Mishcha. Rabbi Yami said the person is obligated to pay a barrel of wine because that is contained within the value of a barrel of oil. A barrel of oil is more expensive. Essentially, Rabbi Yami said you are allowed to combine their testimony in such a case. And the Gemara asks, come on, who are you following? Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. We're following Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, who said above, Yesh bechlal masayim maneh. Amor de Amr Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, Heichad yesh bechlal masayim maneh. I understand that Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar might say it in a situation where within 200 it is contained 100. But ki hai gavna mi Amar, but in such a situation where the contradiction is whether it's a barrel of oil or a barrel of wine, so we wouldn't say that there's a barrel of wine contained within a barrel of oil. So would he go that far? Would he say that? And the Gemara says, lo no tzricha, it's necessary l'demei. They weren't actually saying that he owes a barrel of wine or a barrel of oil. They were saying the value of a barrel of wine or the value of a barrel of oil. And of course, the value of a barrel of wine is contained within the value of a barrel of oil. And so therefore the testimony was combined. And the Gemara continues, Echad omer b'diyoto ha'elyona ve'echad omer b'diyoto ha'tachtona. One says that the transaction took place in the upper floor. The other one says in the lower floor. This would be a situation of a secondary detail. Amar Rabbi Chanina says, Ma'isa b'lefnei Rebbe, there was an incident like this before Rebbe, where again there was a contradiction with secondary details of this nature. V'tzireh feidusan, and he combined their testimony in that situation. And Rashi explains, V'tzireh feidusan, again, Rebbe said you can combine the testimonies. Rabbi Yoshua ben Karcha, that also, it follows Rabbi Yoshua ben Karcha, the Tarvayu Mona Mechayvi. They're both agreeing that the person owes a Mona, V'yafa gav de miskachshi bevedikos, even though there's a contradiction in terms of the examination, in terms of these secondary details, K'der Rav Yehuda, that follows Rav Yehuda's ruling. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, Uminayin l'cheshayotza v'chulu, from where do we know that when they leave the court, the judge shouldn't say that I was the one that ruled innocent and I was overruled by the majority, and the judge should not say that because that's being a talebearer. And the Gemara says, Tanu Rabban, and the rabbis taught, Minayin l'cheshayotza lo yomar hareini mezake v'chaver mechayven, from where do we know that when he leaves the courtroom, he shouldn't say, I said innocent, but my colleagues said liable. Avol ma esa, but what should I do? Shechaverai rabu olai, because my colleagues, they were the majority, and therefore we had to follow the majority. The judge should not say that. And the Gemara says, Talmud Lomar, the Brisa says, Talmud Lomar, the Pasuk says, Lo seilech rochel be'amecha, you shouldn't be a talebearer in your nation. V'yomer holech rochel megalasod, it says one who's a talebearer and reveals the secrets. And the Gemara continues, how Talmida, there was a student, the Nafik Oleh Kala, that the word went out, the Goli Milsa de Itmar Be Midrasha, that he revealed something that was said in the Beis Medrash, Basar Esrin V'tartin Shnin, it was already 22 years since it was stated in the Beis Medrash, and Afke Ravami mi Be Midrasha, Ravami said he was exiled, Ravami kicked him out from the Beis Medrash, Amar, he said, Dain Goli Razia, this is a person who reveals secrets. And Rashi explains, Basar Esrin V'tartin Shnin de Itmar Be Midrasha, after 22 years after it was stated in the Beis Medrash, Afkehu Talmida, they expelled that particular student, V'davar Lashon Hara, and this was a matter of Lashon Hara, he had said Lashon Hara, and that's why he was expelled. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, Kolzman Shemevi Raya, as long as he brings evidence, Soser Es Hadin, they can overturn the verdict. It means to say if he brings new evidence that they didn't have before, so then the court can overturn its original ruling. And the Mishnah continues, Amar Lo, if he says to him, that would mean if one litigant says to the other. Some have the gears of Amru Lo, they say to him, meaning the court says to him. In any case, if they say to him, Kol Rayos Sheyesh Lachavi Mikan Ad Shloshim Yom, if they say to him, any evidence that you have to bring within the next 30 days, Matzah B'soch Shloshim Yom, if he finds it within 30 days, so then they can overturn the verdict. La'achar shloshim yom, but if he brings it after 30 days, eino soser, then it does not overturn the verdict. And the Mishnah continues, Amar Rav Shimon ben Gamliel, Rav Shimon ben Gamliel says, Ma yaseh zeh shelo matzah b'soch shloshim, u'matzah la'achar shloshim, what should this person do? He didn't find the evidence within 30 days, he finds it after 30 days, we should still accept that new evidence. And the Mishnah continues, Amar Lo, if he says to him, Have Eidim, bring witnesses. V'Amar, and he says, Ein li Eidim, he says, I don't have witnesses. Or Amar, Have Raya, or let's say he says, bring evidence. V'Amar, Ein li Raya, he says, I don't have evidence. Well, li'achar zman, but then after some time, Hevi Raya, he does bring the evidence. U'matzah Eidim, he finds the witnesses. Hareza Eino Klum, that's nothing, he already said he didn't have. Amar Rav Shimon ben Gamliel, Rav Shimon ben Gamliel says, Ma yaseh zeh, what should this person do? Shelo hayodeya sheyesh lo Eidim, he didn't know that he had witnesses. U'matzah Eidim, and then he found witnesses. Lo hayodeya sheyesh lo Raya, he didn't know that he had evidence. U'matzah Raya, and then he found evidence, and therefore we are able to accept that new evidence. And the Mishnah continues, Rosh Meschayev Bedin. Let's say a person sees that he's about to be held liable in court. V'yamar, and then he says, Kirvu ploni uploni v'yiduni. Let's bring so-and-so, and they'll testify for me. O shehotzi raya mitachas pandasa, where he brings out evidence from under his belt. Everybody agrees in that situation. Hareza eino klum, that is nothing. And Rashi explains, Kirvu ploni uploni afilu Rav Shimon ben Gamliel mode. In that case, even Rav Shimon ben Gamliel would admit, Shekevan shahayo deya behen, since he knew about them. V'yamar ainli, and he said that he didn't have any. Vadai shakranim heim. Certainly those people are liars. And the Gemara says, Amar Rabba bar Rav Huna. Rabba bar Rav Huna says, Halacha Rav Shimon ben Gamliel. The halacha is like Rav Shimon ben Gamliel. And Rashi explains, Halacha Rav Shimon akamai sakoi. We're going on the first Rav Shimon ben Gamliel in the Mishnah. Again, the first case of the Mishnah was where the person says all of the evidence that you have to bring it within the next 30 days. If he brings it after 30 days, Rav Shimon ben Gamliel says we accept that testimony. The second case of Rav Shimon ben Gamliel was, let's say he says, bring your witnesses, and he says, I don't have witnesses, bring your evidence. He says, I don't have evidence, and then later he finds the evidence, he finds the witnesses. So again, Rav Shimon ben Gamliel says that he can bring the witnesses and the evidence in that case. And so right now we're saying, Halacha Rav Shimon akamai sakoi. We're going on the first case of Rav Shimon ben Gamliel. Kaven de lo amar ein li, since he didn't say I don't have, afagav de lo matzah besoch shloshim yom, even though he didn't find within 30 days, still according to Rav Shimon ben Gamliel, he can bring that evidence. And the Gemara continues, V'yamar Rabba bar Rav Huna, and Rabba bar Rav Huna says, Ein halacha kedivrei chachamim, that the halacha is not like the chachamim. And so the Gemara asks the obvious question, Pshita, it's obvious, Kaven damar halacha Rav Shimon ben Gamliel, once you already said the halacha is like Rav Shimon ben Gamliel, Memelo yadana dein halacha kechacham, so I automatically know the halacha is not like the chachamim. If the halacha is like Rav Shimon ben Gamliel, it's obviously not like the chachamim who argue on Rav Shimon ben Gamliel. And the Gemara answers, Ma'u detema, what might you have said, Hani milu lechatchila, that that's true lechatchila, avol diavad, but after the fact, maybe I would have said if we paskin like the Chacham and the case is already over, Shapir dummy, so then already maybe we would leave the case as is, Kamash Malon, so that's what it's teaching us, the Ovid, Mahadrinan lay, that if they did it, if they paskin in a case and followed the Chacham, we would actually go back, we would retract and do the case again. And the Gemara continues at the two dots, the Mishnah said, Amar lo haviyedim v'chulu, again, this was the second case of the Mishnah, he says, bring witnesses, the person says, I don't have, Amar Rav Shimon ben Gamliel, Rav Shimon ben Gamliel says that if he finds later on, he's allowed to bring them in. And the Gemara says, Amar Rabba bar Rav Huna, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Rabba bar Rav Huna says that Rabbi Yochanan says, Halacha kedivrei chachamim. In this second case of the Mishnah, the halacha is like the chachamim. V'yamar Rabba bar Rav Huna, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, and Rabba bar Rav Huna says that Rabbi Yochanan says, Ein halacha Rav Shimon ben Gamliel. The halacha is not like Rav Shimon ben Gamliel in this second case of the Mishnah. And the Gemara again asks, Pshita, isn't that obvious? Kevan damar halacha kedivrei chachamim. Once you're already saying the halacha is like the chachamim, memelu yadana dein halacha Rav Shimon ben Gamliel, don't I automatically know that the halacha is not like Rav Shimon ben Gamliel? And the Gemara says, Hakamash malon, what he's teaching us is by saying not only halacha kedivrei chachamim, but also saying the halacha is not like Rav Shimon ben Gamliel. What he's saying is devahahi ein halacha Rav Shimon ben Gamliel. That in this case, meaning in this second case of the Mishnah, the halacha is not like Rav Shimon ben Gamliel. Habekulu, but in all other cases, halacha Rav Shimon ben Gamliel, the halacha would be like Rav Shimon ben Gamliel. It's only in this situation that the halacha is not like Rav Shimon ben Gamliel. And leafuka mehadama Rabba bar Brachana am Rabbi Yochanan. That would exclude the statement of Rabba bar Brachana am Rabbi Yochanan, because Rabba bar Brachana said that Rabbi Yochanan said, Kol makom sheshana Rav Shimon ben Gamliel b'Mishnah seinu. Anytime we find Rav Shimon ben Gamliel in our Mishnah, halacha kamoso, the halacha is like him, with three exceptions: chutz me arev v'tzidon v'raya achrona, except for the cases of arev, tzidon, and raya achrona. And over here, this would go against that, because this would be saying that the halacha is not like Rav Shimon ben Gamliel only in this last case of the Mishnah, but otherwise the halacha is always like Rav Shimon ben Gamliel. And Rashi explains, hakamash malon devahaluchudahu dein halacha Rav Shimon. The chiddush is that in this case alone, the halacha is not like Rav Shimon. Habechol makam halacha kamoso afila ba'arev v'tzidon. But in all other cases, even arev and tzidon, the halacha is like Rav Shimon ben Gamliel. Arev is beget pashat. Arev is a case that we find in Bava Basra. Tzidon is b'Meseches Gittin b'misha achzu kardiakos. Tzidon is found in Meseches Gittin. And raya achrona is actually hach basrais of the masnis. And raya achrona is actually the very last case, this case that we're talking about, the second case of the Mishnah, de'ilu b'kamaisa hilchas hakavase. We're saying that the halacha is not like Rav Shimon ben Gamliel in this last case of the Mishnah, but the halacha is like him in the earlier case of the Mishnah. And the Gemara continues, Ahu yenuka de tavu ladina. There was a child that was brought brought to court, Kami de Rav Nachman, in front of Rav Nachman. Amar le Islach Sahad, he said, do you have witnesses? Amar le Lo, he said, the child said, no, I don't have witnesses. Islach Rai said, do you have evidence? Amar le Lo, he said, no. Chayve Rav Nachman, so Rav Nachman obligated the child to pay. Havakabachi v'azul, so then the child was going and he was crying. Shamu hanoch inshi, so some people heard, and Amrule, they said to him, Anon yadinan b'mili davach, we know what's going on with the business matters of your father. We actually can testify on your behalf. And the Gemara said, Amar Rav Nachman then said, Beho, in such a situation, afilu Rabbanan modu, even the Rabbanan admit, even though normally the Rabbanan wouldn't let you come back in to present evidence, but over here they would allow it. Dianuka b'mili diavu lo yada, because the child doesn't know what's going on with the business matters of his father, and so therefore it would be understandable that he would not know about this evidence. And the Gemara continues, Ahi itasa denafak shtara mitusa yada, there was a woman, and she was holding a star. Rashi explains, denafak shtara mitusa yada sheheminua halova v'hamalva l'shomro. The borrower and the lender, they allowed her to watch over the star. It was like she was a third party that was watching the star. Amrullah, she said to him, Yadana b'hai shtara de priyahav, I happen to know about the star that it was already paid off. And the Gemara says, Heimna Rav Nachman. The Gemara says Rav Nachman believed her, trusted what she was saying. Amrle Rav Rav Nachman. Rav said to Rav Nachman, Kiman, Kirebi. Who is this following? Is this following Rebbe? De Amar Osios Niknos B'Mesira? Because Rebbe says if you have a star, it's given over to somebody else. Just giving over the star, that's enough to create a kinyan. Rashi explains, Osios niknos b'mesira hamocher shtar chov lechavero. Let's say a person sells a shtar chov to his friend. In other words, the malve is holding the shtar chov and he gives it to somebody else that the other person can use it to collect. Kona hachov b'mesiras osios. Just taking the osios, the letters, just taking the shtar, that allows that person to acquire the debt, and he's able to collect the debt. We'll say the Rebbe b'hamocher es asfina. We find that in Baba Basra. V'hachinami kana. So here also, we'll say she acquired it. V'havi kididot's like her shtar. V'ne'emenes lomar peru. And that's why we're saying she's believed to say it was paid, because it's like she has acquired the shtar. Amar Lein, so the Gemara continues, he said back to him, Shaniach, it's not true. It's not because Osios Niknos b'Mesira, but rather it's different over here. The Iboy calls it, because if she wanted, she could actually burn the shtar, and therefore, since she has the ability to burn the shtar, we also believe her if she says it was paid off. And the Gemara continues, Ika diamri lohem Rav Nachman. There are those who have the following version, that Rav Nachman did not actually believe what she was saying. Amrle Rav Nachman, Rav said to Rav Nachman, V'ho iboy, but wouldn't she be able again to burn the shtar? And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Lamed Aleph Amud Beis.